Hey everyone, this is my second response for Unit 1, day number 2. Um, so I wanted to expand upon some of the things that our group members, Sarah and Rosa, talked about in their contributions. I thought that Sarah's way of expressing her thoughts and her thought processes were really concise. And Rosa too. I think that they both brought up really interesting new points, and I was kind of excited to see people expand upon the whole Donald Trump Twitter thing. And something that Sarah said that resonated with me was that she missed these sort of conversations that you normally miss out on when it comes to online courses. So yeah, I agree. This is kind of a really refreshing thing to do. So in talking about social media as an archive, Twitter being the most immediate example that I think we've all been discussing, authenticity and new truths, which were things that I think Rosa brought up, as well as Sarah. I think that as this might come across as a little hoity-toity, but I think that as a responsible user of social media and as a responsible, consumer of content, whether it be news content, personal content, things like that, I think that it's healthy to take things with a grain of salt, and it's healthy to have a little bit of skepticism when it comes to things, like not taking everything at face value. When it comes to photography that Rosa was talking about, photography when it comes to Instagram posts or Facebook posts or things like that, it's always good to keep in mind that things like that can be edited, things like that can be altered and made to look a certain way. And that's just not for the purpose of making yourself look neat on social media. I think that photographers in the art world have always done things like that. You always frame something a certain way to make something look better than what it might really look. And artists do that all the time, I think, when it comes to photography. So again, it's always good to have a healthy dose of skepticism when it comes to things. One photographer that I wanted to bring up in specifically was Cindy Sherman, and I wanted to tie her into not only defining archives and what archives mean, but also point number 4, which was to compare the methodologies of media archaeology to those of art history. Consider how those run parallel, how they differ. So Cindy Sherman is a female photographer, and she was very big in the feminist movement of art history back in the day. She was a very prevalent photographer. She did a series of photos that were meant to look as if they took place in classical Hollywood films. A lot of them were black and white. She would wear wigs and costumes and put herself into all kinds of different situations that were meant to look like they came straight from a film, as if they were a movie still. And the point of this was to state something about the status of female actresses in the film industry and how they are typecast based off of the way that they look, typecast based off of, I don't want to say traditional female roles, but stereotyped female roles, being the damsel in distress, where you have the pretty woman who's weak and needs a man to save her, or if she's a femme fatale and she's a strong female character, she was expected to be like wearing revealing clothing and things like that. Those sorts of issues were things that Cindy Sherman wanted to tackle, and I think she tackled them pretty effectively with her photography. So you can alter your photography to make a certain message come across in the way that you want it to come across. You can either use that for good, you can use that for, to tell a lie, I guess. But Cindy Sherman used her abilities as a photographer to tell a message that I believe was positive and was in benefit of feminism in Hollywood and feminism in the art industry and feminism in general. Another thing about her photography is that, of course, it was all physical photography. It was printed and it was submitted and it's exhibited in art museums and things like that. So when it comes to archiving that stuff, as opposed to archiving things that are digital, like Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, things like that, museums have to preserve those artworks, and they have to do so in a way that stays true to the artist's intentions and the original state of the work in which it was first published. So when you're discussing printed photography, that paper, the printed image, deteriorates over time and it needs to be restored. There was one work in particular of Cindy Sherman's where she pieced together different bits of photography onto one paper, and she used different things like tape and glue and things like that, and that stuff deteriorates over time. And in order to preserve that artwork within the archive of Cindy Sherman's work, of course, those museums and art historians work to keep the materials as original as possible, using the exact same brand and kind of tape, using the exact same kind of paper that she used to print her photography. And a lot of the times, manufacturers no longer provide those sorts of things. So it's an interesting thing when you think about preserving physical archives. You have to keep details where a lot of people wouldn't normally think that details need to be kept when it comes to, like, the kinds of mediums that were being used and things like that. So I feel like that's where methodologies deviate from one another when it comes to media archaeology and art history, the physical, the digital. Digital stuff can circulate and it can theoretically live on forever so long as a certain social media platform lives on. But even then, you can transfer content from one platform to another. So theoretically, things can live on in the age of the internet for as long as we, the contributors, choose to circulate them. Another thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to digital archives are things like Rosa brought up how these sorts of things will be taken in the future, and whether or not they'll lose their authenticity, whether or not they'll be understood by people in the future. And what's interesting to think about is, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we didn't have things like Twitter or Tumblr, and there are a lot of new forms of language that we've developed for the sake of online connectivity that wouldn't have made any sense. For example, I wanted to use a pretty prevalent Tumblr as a website where people share things like memes and funny photography and funny cartoons and things like that. Tumblr it's a blog website, so it can be for whatever content you want it to serve. But a pretty popular thing I see pretty often is the use of an image. For example, like it's hard to think of one on the spot, but you'll have an image of someone or something having a hard time in some kind of random scenario, and then the caption for that image will just say "same." And what that is meant to do is relate the user to the image in a very blunt manner, in a way that's meant to be immediately relatable. People do that pretty comically. Like you'll have, for instance, you can post a photo of like a really bumpy looking ugly frog, and the caption beneath it will just say "same." And it's meant to relate to those who feel, I guess, like they feel ugly like the frog, or they feel gross like the frog, or they feel sick like the frog. It can mean any kinds of those different things. When people look at that stuff in the future, will they understand that? Will they look at this image of a frog that said same and understand what that's supposed to mean and understand how that's supposed to come across. So that's something really interesting that I'm excited to see in the future. Like, will people get the stuff that we're posting now and archiving now and contributing now? I would like to expand upon a few more things, but I think I'm running a little far on the time, so I'll save it for later. All right, I look forward to responses, seeing what else everybody else has to say and new ideas and whatnot. Thank you guys for listening to me. Chat with you soon.